Hello, and welcome to episode 82 of the Pursuit of Freedom podcast. So excited to have you here. I wanted to jump in because I mentioned last week that I'm trying something different. I'm putting out the next few episodes that I've already recorded with guests unedited. The only editing I've done is topping and tailing it. So at the beginning, I chuck the intro in. At the end, I chuck the outro in. And I just sort of trim off the beginning if there was any sort of filler or fluff then before we actually got into the episode. So very scary for me. This is totally unedited. Now, I don't know why I'm making such a big deal out of it, because all I do in my editing is I might shorten pauses, I might get rid of a couple of ums, ahs. Maybe on one or two occasions I've deleted a small section because I didn't like it anymore. So I don't really do a lot of editing at all. It's bare bones. So why am I so terrified? Dunno. Enjoy it. Let me know what you think. I'm trying to make my processes more sustainable. And this is one of those ways. So enjoy the episode. And if you haven't already, check out episode 81 where I was talking about values. I've already heard from a few of you who really enjoyed the exercise in that episode. So if you're feeling a little bit stuck right now, go give it a listen. If not, enjoy today's episode. G'day and welcome to the Pursuit of Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Rosie Burrows, and I'm on a journey to find my freedom so that I can help you do exactly the same. Join me each week as I share the stories of everyday people who have found their own paths to freedom. I'm not going to focus on job titles and accolades because I don't care about that stuff, and neither should you. I want to uncover what truly makes you tick. Who are you when you step away from society's expectations and follow your heart? I still haven't figured it out yet. Have you? Either way, buckle up because it's going to be one hell of a ride. Welcome back to the Pursuit of Freedom podcast, everyone. I'm really excited for today's conversation. Joining me is Kasia Makuch-Cole. She's all the way in London, actually. She's a psychotherapist, an academic. She's the founder of Balance Psychotherapy Clinic. And Kasia has a really refreshing take on mental health, integrating body awareness, mindfulness, neurobiology. And she's really passionate about helping people find balance and healing, joy, purpose in life. So if you've ever felt like traditional mental health approaches have missed the mark a bit for you, I'm putting my hand up there, or you're curious to learn more about achieving balance in your life and feeling joy and fulfillment, I think this conversation is going to be for you. So Kasia, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. Such a pleasure
I'm
meeting
excited.
you, hearing your story. And I'm very glad that I can share my approach to psychotherapy. So it's more like an approach to approaches. It's a very strange thing. I'm not changing anything, so no one needs to worry. But it's about how we as therapists approach the techniques. And as we as therapists approach the modality. So I remember when we met before, you mentioned someone you know who came for an assessment and came out very distressed because the assessment was about talking about the whole trauma of her life.
Yeah.
And then listing it almost out there. When she came out of from an appointment, she was very distressed and dysregulated. So it's something I want to change. Starting from there, every single session can regulate a client who comes into the therapeutic space. And the way how we can do it is by balancing affect. So let's bring us a little bit into a space what affect is and how we can detect that. So what if we think about an inner system, kind of inner solar system? Imagine that you have a solar system on the inside and almost like going beyond your boundaries of your body and almost like spreading. It's almost bigger than you are. You have got a sun in the center of your solar system, and then you have got planets, millions of stars, the space in between them. So let's call those planets and stars and everything that is in the solar system, let's call them objects.
Okay, yeah.
And that sun might symbolize compassion for us, or love, or compassionate love, gentleness, kindness. And then let's imagine that the sun shines on all those planets and stars with warmth and compassion. Those stars and planets will be thoughts and emotions, body sensations, our illnesses, suffering, trauma, just everything out there. And we can approach that to start with, to balance with compassion and kindness and gentleness. So whatever happens in session or in assessment, we can bring that into a space of compassion and kindness. So when I see someone for an assessment, I don't need to know the story of that person's life.
Okay.
It's enough when the person says, I went through trauma. And that's enough for the assessment. If someone needs to say whether it's a sexual trauma or there is a violence or any other trauma, that's enough. That person already talked about it within one sentence. I suffered trauma.
Can
If
I
we don't need to go
interrupt?
into
Because this
Go on.
is fascinating. I have seen many psychologists and psychiatrists, and whenever I see a new one, they want my life story, and I have to go through every single trauma I have lived, and they're asking all these questions for every single detail. But are you saying that that's not necessary?
No, it's not. The nature of trauma, it impacts our neurobiology in exactly the same way. And the affect we're going to work is exactly the same. It's going to be despair, helplessness, terror, and so on. So we can assume what the affect is that we're going to work with. The affect is the lively vibration. It's like an emotion, but with affect, we can say emotion is more precise. When we say sadness, we know that it's sadness. We might identify where it is in the body. But when we say affect, we are open for exploration and for empathetic curiosity. We don't need to jump into conclusion. We do not need to name it yet, because by naming it, we're already formulating what it is, and then we know we're going in a certain direction. So that's why we don't need to do all of this in an assessment. There is a process in therapy, and we can do it slowly. If session by session, when someone comes, one needs to be ready to open that space, right? And then when we say, let's open that space, we don't, I would discourage people to go into detailing the past. Our past is received by our neurobiology, how this affected us. It's much better to start from the present moment. How does this affect you now in the present moment? How do you feel it in your body? So that would be the first step of it. How do you feel your trauma in your body now? Where is it in the body? Is there
You
an
know,
image?
I have never been asked this by a health professional.
There are techniques. One of the techniques to start working with affect, very good one, actually designed by a philosopher and someone who studied with Rogers, is a man called Gendlin. He designed technique called focusing. It's an amazing technique and it's underestimated in psychotherapy. It's a technique to work with a present moment when you ask a client or a friend, how are you really today? It straight away brings you into the present moment. How are you really today? And then you're moving the clutter away, like, what needs to be cooked for today, what sort of task I need to accomplish today. Do I have an washing to be done, whatever comes into mind, or
Yeah.
whichever sensation, because sometimes we have got a sensation, like when people suffer with chronic depression, they will have that sensation let's say, in the chest. It's dark, it's heavy, and that's the sensation that it stays with them. So let's say we're not going to work with this today, we're just going to watch it from a distance. And despite that sensation, I would ask, how are you really today? And then there is that sort of simmering unknown comes into play. That sort of feel of being a little bit uncomfortable, one might feel it in the stomach, kind of not really, we don't put it into words yet.
Okay.
It's that sort of feel, if you want to do it with me, please go ahead and just kind of like ask yourself, how am I really today? And when you don't talk about the task or whether we're recording correctly or whether you have got whether everything is going smoothly, and you really dive into your body, you can really feel that unknown sense of unknown. And then the first kind of way of approaching it would be not to ask what's the emotion that is there, but perhaps what's the sensation, physical sensation.
Yeah, because so often we try to articulate what we're feeling and intellectualize it.
Yes.
But if you're
And
talking
we
about a
run into our
sensation,
head
yeah.
and we don't
And
have an
actually,
access to our body. But
right.
where are we suffering? So we're suffering in our body.
Okay, I want to
Yes.
go more into this. I had a listener ask me, isn't trauma in our head? But what we're just talking about is sensations. So what would your take on that be?
It's in the body and it's in our neurobiology. That's why it's really worth working with those sensations, because the sensation of joy is a sensation. So how on earth we can get to being peaceful and joyful if we don't work with our body? We're just working with the narrative. Narrative is secondary to what's in the body, and a
Yeah.
skillful therapist needs to be able to name that. That's why it's very important to pause it, to not go into the narrative so quickly, because narrative can be faulty as well. We have got
Yes.
thousands of thoughts a day. We
Yeah.
are very, very compulsive in our thinking. The narrative very often can be really, really faulty. What it is, no matter what sort of mental health we work with, is to bring back these two sensations in our body and skillfully and with curiosity name it. Just with a sensation. If it's numbness, let it be numbness. If it's some sort of heaviness, let it be heaviness. And then slowly, just to redirect our brain from creating narrative and bringing it
Oh,
into the body, it's worth asking questions like, does it have a color or an
okay.
image? Or how would you what's the image that it's kind of coming into your imagination when you're coming into meeting with that sensation? And slowly, slowly let it open up. And then if it's, let's say it's a color of gray and it's a color of numbness, and let's say it's a gray ball that is just unpenetrable, let's ask questions like, what does it want? What does it need? And I'm not going to ask you. I'm just going to kind of
Well,
work
you
with my
can. Yeah.
body. Oh, do you want
I'm
to?
open if you want to give us a demo, because it's fascinating, and what you're talking about sounds very primal. You're not intellectualizing it. It's really interesting, and I haven't experienced this with a therapist before, so I'm happy to do whatever you walk me through.
So when you're asking yourself, how am I really today? What's come? What does it come for you in your body?
Sort of in my belly and a bit in my throat. That's where I'm feeling tension, I think.
Tension.
Mm.
And does the tension have a color?
Sort of pulsing between orange and red.
Pulsing. That's such a powerful image, the pulsation of red. Is there any other image?
That's very empty.
Some sort of emptiness and pulsation.
Emptiness and just the very strong colours, very consuming.
Mm-hmm. And if you were going to just slowly start to think about emotion.
Mm. The first word that comes up is anxiety. And I don't know if that's the best word, but that's the word that's coming up, and a feeling of like uneasiness.
Uneasiness. Is there a fear as well, or some sort of uneasiness only?
Fear, or I think I'd call it worry. There's a worry.
Mm-hmm. Is it familiar? Kind of, does it sit very often there, or it's just today?
Oh, it's often.
It's often there.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. So it's that sort of a feel of worry, pulsating worry. In an empty space, pulsating colors.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say it's a new sensation, but it's not something that's there all the time. So it kind of comes and goes, but recently, for the past couple of months, is very dominant.
Mm-hmm. And does it come with other thoughts or images?
It comes with flashbacks, I think, to losing my parents, that the feelings of that worry, the uneasiness, the anxiety definitely takes me back to there. So there's flashes of those incidents.
Of loss.
Mm.
More of loss, of lack of safety.
Mm. I think there's a bit of both there. There's a lot of fear tied to it of losing people I love.
Mm. So that sort of pulsating fear of loss.
It's in a constricting feeling.
Mm-hmm. And just always, whenever it comes, never criticize yourself for that. Never feel like, oh God, it comes again. Oh God, I'll never be able to get rid of this. Always nourish it. It's a message, it's a messenger, and with nourishment and kindness, of almost a nourishment and kindness of that safe, ideal parent. Just attend to that space with that, I hear you. I see. And you can say that in your body to that pulsating space. I hear you, I see you. You are within my cosmos. You are within my solar space. I'm the sun, I'll see you. And just make sure that you're holding it gently. Don't fight with it. We can't rearrange the solar system.
Damn it! But why is it that we're almost taught or conditioned to think we can control it and we can just push it down? People go, chin up, chin up. Let's, keep going. Why are we so conditioned to do that? Because from what you're just saying, it's probably not very helpful to do that. And in fact, I think it's a fallacy that we have control over those sensations and feelings and thoughts.
Yes. And by controlling those sensations and thoughts, we're controlling our creativity. We
Ooh.
can't be creative. We can't play. All our energy goes into controlling that one sensation. When you are a full solar system, so I'm guessing there is another planet saying, chin up,
Yeah.
need to be strong. Where is it in your body, that sort of feel that says,
It's like my shoulders, my back,
shoulder.
you know? Yeah.
So
It's a
that's the
weight.
one.
Mm.
That's the one. And is there any way that you can go into the dialogue with that space and say, you know what? I got it. I've got it.
Mm.
You don't need to. You were very useful. My shoulders, my kind of an energy, that sort of energy, right? In shoulders saying, chin up, we need to survive, fight,
Mm. Mm.
right? But you can say to yourself, I'm okay, I've got it. You don't need to switch that energy on in my inner space.
Mm.
And you can
Mm.
switch something else. And I'm
Yeah.
wondering if you were going to ask that pulsating space here, what does it need? What does it want? What would it say?
Just wants love, compassion, someone to listen, not
Hmm,
judge. Just, a big hug.
a big hug. And you know what? Check with your body. Where is that space in your body that can listen, that can be a good companion, that
I
gives
just feel,
hug?
as you're talking, I just feel this, there's a sensation of it spreading through here. It's just like a constriction is being relieved. And I go, so I don't know where the listening part of my body is, but I feel my chest opening.
It feels like it's in your breath.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. If you can just be with that breath for a while, there is some sort of freedom in it, isn't it?
Mm. Mm.
Some sort of, it's listening is compassionate, but there is a lot of freedom in that breath.
Mm.
Does that breath, the breath when you're kind of focusing on it, does it have a color or an image?
It's a very pale blue.
Pale blue.
Mm.
What's the sensation?
Just I feel very light and just like by the ocean and the air, the breeze is just flowing. There's a lot of flow.
It's a flow, freedom,
Mm.
creativity, openness. And I'm guessing it doesn't need anything, doesn't want anything, but just
No.
ask. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. And even just having that short conversation, I have a feeling of relief. I
Mm.
haven't actually said what I'm intellectualizing and what my stresses are at all. But already I feel like, oh,
What if you hold in your mind at the same time the pulsation here,
mm,
the redness, and the light blue of the freedom and openness? Just take time and hold it in your mind for a bit and see what comes, whether there is a sensation or a color or an image that comes to you.
I can feel the blue is very calming and it's sort of swirling around that pulsing red. Just not overtaking it, but just sort of,
Holding it
what's the word?
gently.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
They can coexist, right?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Mm.
We are a vastness. We are such a beauty on the inside. We are made of stars, and you have the power to redirect to an object on the inside you want. And you have the power to redirect your energy to the object the way you want. You can create a battle on the inside that you will take the energy from the shoulders and your battle the harm, the trauma, the pulsating red. And in this way, you create even more suffering for yourself. Or you can take the energy from the breath, the affect that is there, the beauty of freedom,
Mm.
gentleness, that sort of easiness, right? And you're holding these two spaces together every day. They don't really change that much in the body. They do, but it takes time. So you'll always find that freedom in your breath. And then holding it for yourself, because that's where healing is.
Mm.
The way how you are creatively using affect in your body and on the outside of your body, because you can have the affect also that you can experience if there is absolutely no nurturing affect on the inside. And there are situations like that we are
Mm.
suffering so badly that there is nothing on the inside that we can lean on, or it doesn't feel like there is. Our neurobiology is so swept by the affects that are harmful that we can't access anything else. Then
Mm.
let's lean on something outside, like nature, like ocean,
Mm. Mm.
like a nice bath, whatever it is, kind of like swimming, whatever people like, right? Lots of warmth, lots of physical sensation. We can give ourselves a hug as well. Whatever
Mm.
to recreate that feelings, a chat with a good friend, connection to a group you love. That sort of feel. And even if we are so we don't have access to the nice nurturing affect on the inside, to always make sure that we're telling ourselves that we do not switch the energy from the shoulders that you have got there. Or some people might have them in the stomach, that critical energy that say you should have been better by now, or why
Mm.
do you react to the external circumstances this way, or why on earth haven't you thought about it before? That sort of critic, it's never, we all have them, those thoughts, but they are not creative and they do not make us better. It's that sort of energy that if one engages with it, okay, it is an energy that sometimes make people succeed in something. Like they go into that fight flight mode and they push through something. I don't know, exam or
Mm.
a more traumatic event. Someone passed away. We need to push through. We need to tense and go through that. But then we need to know that I'm using that energy and at some point I need to stop. Because that energy at some point, that affect of self-criticism, that affect of just getting ourselves together and go through things, at some point that affect might turn towards us and it will be very self-critical. So we just need to be sure that we know which sort of affect we're using. And then, taking that further, if we work with this, then we can apply different therapeutic methods. If the
Okay.
affect goes in our thinking, because people are very, very different, then let's use cognitive behavioral strategies. Some people would say, God, I just don't understand the talk about affect or
Yeah,
energy.
I want to go into this because healing, people want to heal. And are we healing using our mind, using our body? My dog just made a sound then. I don't know if you heard it. She went,
I love
she says, I heal with my body.
Here it is. Oh gosh, my dog knows what 15-minute session is. She starts to bark at at the end.
Really? Of course, of course. But
It's so
is
funny.
there, this is a bit of a loaded question, but is there one way that works best to help people on their healing journey?
I don't think there is. Or I would say there are different languages to describe a similar reality, and the way we can't agree on healing because we just use different language to heal it, to describe that.
Mm.
I use the language of affect because I come from psychoanalytic object relations, and that is
Right.
so vague. So it's easier for me than to adopt it to a client who wants to talk about energy, or a client who wants to talk about thought processes, or a client who
Right.
wants to talk about emotions, or a
Uh-huh.
client. It's just so it's very easy for me to adopt, but I still can almost like the simmering baseline to know to bring the balance between the kind of destructive impulse and then the nourishing impulse in our body. So I'm changing the language to impulses instead of affect. But kind of like
Yeah.
I would use any language that works for someone. So let's say someone would say, I have these narratives in my body, and I'm constantly obsessively have one thought that I'm not good enough, or I should live in other country, or I should live somewhere else, or it's we can have kind of that impulsive, obsessive thought coming to us all the time, and then it just lowers our mood because the brain is then preoccupied with that. So interestingly, I would use exactly the same strategy for it. I would say, when you're thinking that, where do you feel it in your body? So when you have that thought, where if a person has gotten access to their body, the difference is when someone says, I don't feel my body from here down. That's the problem for therapy.
Mm.
But if let's say I'm not good enough, and I would say, gosh, I constantly feel it in my forehead, and I would say, so what's the color there? Or what's the image? And the image I come with is a little girl that wasn't good enough in a primary school, or no one noticed. So I would then say, what does the little girl wants? What does the little girl needs? And that little girl, the image might say, oh, I was scared and no one was noticing
Mm.
what I actually wanted to do, and how I didn't feel safe to express myself or my needs.
Mm.
And if I was expressing myself, I wasn't expressing it in the way other people wanted. So then I would ask the little girl, so what would you like? And she would say, oh, maybe just draw the way I wanted to draw. And then the same process again, bringing that, so what would you like to feel? It looks like, you little girl would like to be more creative, to feel less constrained,
Mm.
more good enough, or just good enough. Just be yourself.
This is
So I
this
don't.
is so
I
simple, but
It is
I have
extremely simple, and
but
I
I
don't
have
ask.
never been
I
asked what
wouldn't
do
ask
I
about my
want.
history.
Right. What I don't know if it's the same in the UK. I'm sure it's very similar to Australia, but the big thing here in psychology is CBT, and that's what all the GPs are pushing people to do, cognitive behavioral therapy. I've done it all and I hate it and I just roll my eyes.
It might be useful if there is that underlying, like that
Right.
underlying dialogue applied.
Right.
Because
Okay.
then, because then we can bring it to CBT and say, in reality, how are you feeling about yourself now, right? You are a certain age, and you can then bring the reality to the thought that is there, but also to acknowledge the roots of that in the body and not in the history. Please notice that I don't ask myself, oh,
Ah,
how was your childhood? Oh, who
no.
cares?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What cares is what holds me back from fully living my life.
Mm.
What suited, what didn't suit me as a child, and it might suited someone else, or someone might have a better neurobiology, be more resilient as a child. I was sensitive child, difficult to perhaps, not every parent is able to adjust their strategies to every child they have.
Mm.
Sometimes parents land with children that are so different to them.
Yeah.
It's just the biggest joke
Yeah.
whatever you have in the family. When you have got a certain temperament and then you have a child is completely different.
Right.
And of course we're all learning about each other, but it's a process, it's a journey. And
Mm.
that's just if there is a trauma, or if people have got parents with some illnesses, addiction, that's another part of the story. To
Mm.
to hold that on the inside in the body, including taking neurobiology, genetics into play, certain conditions that we have. So that needs to be also examined. It's not like we're just
Mm.
examining the thoughts, or not even just the affect. We need to locate the affect in the body. Because let's say if someone is diabetic,
Mm-hmm.
or someone is in perimenopausal stage, there will be sensation in the body that one needs to look after. And we need to ask the sensation in the body what they want. Because those sensations in the body might need treatment. That I'm feeling very different to how I used to be. There is, of course, there is a psychological part of it. There is a loss, like when we're aging,
Right.
but it might be also that we need to work with our body to make it functioning a little bit better for us, because people have got families, or jobs, or whatever, responsibilities. So it's about gently and with curiosity
Mm.
examining the body, how the body, our home, can work for us very well. So mental health is not something that is disconnected from our biology. We are all together, including spirituality,
Mm.
all together, all together.
It is. I love this holistic view, and it it very much feels like a blend of, the very tangible, hard science, and there feels to be like a spiritual element to it as well, and it can coexist. It's not either you believe in science or you don't. It's there's some things that I guess science can't quite explain, and there's some things
Or it
that
might working together. Like we
yeah,
take
together.
into, because science is to test our assumptions. So if
Well, true.
someone,
Yeah.
and it's really good to really test what we're doing, whether this is working for us. And then
Mm.
we know that therapies like compassion focused therapy, mindfulness based CBTs, these approaches work very well. And my suggestion is they work very well because we work with two opposite affects, that
Right.
we bring whatever there is that suffers in us, even if it's trauma, that the trauma kind of channels some destructive affect, really. Terror, despair, or terrible anger. These are destructive affects. They don't make us joyful, but they there. And then
Mm.
to bring something that heals, an affect that heals is compassion, nurturing, kindness, gentleness, loving experiences.
Mm.
We we don't heal. It's a question what heals, right? I've been asking
Mm.
myself that for a very long time. Does our understanding heals? It doesn't. Because we
Mm.
understand something, it doesn't it might bring certain quality of peace, but it might also
Mm.
put us into a mood of resentment, lack of
Oh.
forgiveness,
Oh.
anger, right? And
I
then we
want to know
always
your thoughts.
question
Sorry. Yeah.
ourselves whether the narrative that we created through certain techniques, whether the narrative is correct. And we can live our
Yeah.
life to the end of our life, changing the narrative of what's happened, instead of basically looking after what happened in our body and then bringing the opposite affect to heal. You can
Bringing the
take the
opposite
affect.
affect to heal. Yeah.
And it's not like I gave you the affect when you reconnected with that light blue. It's already there. You have got the power. It's just you need a skillful therapist to gently suggest where that affect might be.
Right. To
If
guide you.
someone practice it, yes. If
Yeah.
someone practice that sort of work, the person will kind of, if it's, if you would say, no, it's not a breath, I would just, let's move somewhere else. Where is it?
Mm.
That sort of kind
Mm.
of gentle exploration of trying to find it in your body, because it doesn't feel then like you learned something or you're incorporated something that it's not yours. It's almost like you're inviting therapist as a guest into your home, and it's
True.
just gently checking, what's behind the sofa.
Yeah.
And you make a little bit more light into the living room and bringing the curtain to open the curtains. That sort of feel.
Mm.
Sorry, you
Mm.
wanted to ask a question and I interrupted you.
Oh, I was the one who interrupted. This is a very, I don't think enjoyable is the word, but it is a very fulfilling conversation we're having, because my experience with the mental health system is a little bit meh. And a big part of the mental health system here is, I guess, diagnoses or assessing people and giving them labels. I would like to know your opinion on the importance of labels or lack thereof. What are your thoughts on labels? For example, you've got depression, you've got PTSD, you've got bipolar, whatever it may be. Do labels have a place? Are they helpful?
So in therapy, we base our assumptions on formulation, and we're formulating together what's happening. So for me, they are not that useful, but I notice that for people who I talk to, they feel like it feels like it's something useful, that this finally explains what is happening in their body. It's almost like clarifying that sometimes people say something like, "Oh, I'm not crazy. I have got this."
Right, it's very
And that's
validating.
validating. And when that experience of validation is extremely helpful, because at least then you know where to start or where to go. So let's say, for example, there is a person who thinks has got complex PTSD. And then I'm thinking, gosh, but maybe there is some sort of neurodiversity as well. Let's test it and see, because then we'll be applying different strategies. Whether we're
Right.
going to go first into treatment of complex PTSD, or actually we will be thinking, oh, this is a neurodiverse brain, which can be partly can come from from complex PTSD, but there is a little
Interesting.
bit slightly different take on that. It would
Right.
be, let's work let's understand how the brain function. What can we do? What can we do to prop up the brain a little bit? There will be more of that in therapy. So they are useful in this sense.
Okay.
And also it's always useful to have other people kind of around. So
True.
if someone comes and wants to be healed, one person is not enough. When you say that you need a village to raise a child, it's exactly
Yeah.
the same. You need a village to treat a client. So
Yeah.
I don't know how it's in Australia, but here it's a terrible feel of patients' confidentiality, that no one
Yeah.
talks to each other because everyone is scared. I don't know, perhaps being sued, or I don't know what people
Yeah.
are scared of,
Mm.
or they don't have enough training in how to write a clinical letter. I don't know. But the easiest approach is to ask a client, what do you want me to write? Because sometimes it's very difficult for a person comes to a GP and say, there is something wrong with me, but I don't know what. But if
Right.
I work with someone, for example, let's say I'm already with 3 sessions with someone,
Mm.
and we already came to certain understanding. And then we want to test the assumptions that we made. Whether, for example, it's neurodiversity. Let's write it down. And then, we can even address it to the client we see. We don't have to address it to a GP or to a psychiatrist. We can address it to the client and say, that's what we discussed. Let's make a summary. These are our assumptions, and that's where
Mm.
we want to take it and then test it. And then let's bring it to a psychiatrist and see what that person thinks. They might have different tools. They definitely have different tools to approach that. Or a GP might approach it differently, running a general health tests. And
Mm.
or nutritionist. I mean, we need to think about nutritionists as well. I mean, this is such a massive issue.
This is
Not
true.
to not think about how food impacts our brain. So let's talk together about what's happening. The patient can navigate, or the client can navigate their care, and then because they will be exploring what works for them.
Mm. Mm.
So not communicating what's happening in therapy in a way, especially when one works with trauma, depression, anxiety. I don't know with other conditions, but with these conditions, I work very well, of bipolar. It's very important that that person is in control and knows what's happening and whether that person can
Mm.
test those assumptions. And therapist has got the language, even if they feel they don't, because they are trained in different modalities, they still can simplify their understanding and write it down, and even as a draft with the client, and then the client can test it whether it's with other specialists. I find that very, very useful, because then we have got common understanding. We can test
Yes.
assumptions, then exclude things that don't work, and then narrow things to things that do work.
So, were you taught this in school or university when you're training? Are you taught these things, or have you had to learn this like trial by fire? How have you got to this point?
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I was trained psychodynamically and psychoanalytically. It's absolutely none of that. In psychoanalysis and psychodynamic approach, one works with something that's called transference and countertransference, which I found extremely re-traumatizing for clients who
Mm.
experience trauma. And we work with trauma all the time. We do not work with clients who come and say, oh, I would like to experience psychoanalytic approach or psychodynamic approach. And I'm really curious how my brain works and what my unconscious processes are. I mean, I've never had a client
Yeah.
come to me and says that. They always come and say, can you help me?
Right.
I feel this darkness and I cannot get out of it.
Yeah.
So so psychoanalytic and psychodynamic approach work with transference, which means I am more withdrawn, and I am creating a space that past experiences can be replayed somehow through the transference. A pure one, the British one, is very restrained in terms of we work only with transference, which obviously you can guess what's happening, right? So when person comes with trauma and then replace the trauma in the counseling room, it re-traumatize they brain. I mean, they're using exactly the same pathways that they are reactivating the pathways that were traumatized
Yeah.
in the past. So it's not a mystery. It cannot work. It cannot work. But the training is good because it gives people and therapists an enormous resilience to meet whatever it is and to not jump into conclusions. And this way, it's useful. But then I'm always saying that there is a lot of understanding in psychodynamic psychotherapy, but the approach, the technique is not right. It's just outdated. What we say, if we know what we know and then we change the approach, for example, we will be balancing affect as balancing the objects on the inside, then, I mean, it's easy. Because I'm not creating a space when someone's replaced something. I'm attending and nurturing to what is there, especially if we're taking that into a body, into somatic experiences. And then I'm reactivating that part of the brain, the parasympathetic nervous system, that is nurturing, loving, compassionate, gentle. Because that's where the healing is. So we know a lot, but we need to change the technique in terms of, so that was my training. And then in terms of learning this, well, because I've been quite unwell, years ago I had bacterial meningitis, which means a bacteria goes into the brain.
Yeah, that's serious. Yeah.
So one, guess what? We know I needed to take into consideration the body. I can't just think, oh, I had bacterial meningitis, I'm depressed now because of my childhood.
Yeah.
Or because of my, yes, it is trauma. It's a brain, acquired brain injury type of thing. And that, how can I work with this to get better? That's where my understanding of neurobiology, of practicing opposite affect to activate the other part of my biology, the parasympathetic nervous system comes into place, and then diet. It's massive
Diet.
moment. Yes.
Okay. All right. We're going into a different realm now. Because you mentioned to me
because of how our brain works. So there is a lot out there now in terms of metabolic psychiatry with Dr. Palmer and other psychiatrists thinking about how we can heal and help the mitochondrium in our brains. And we can with adjusting our diet. So, people might have therapy for years and the techniques didn't work. What if one will experience with diet? Because we can heal our brain. I mean, there are questions like, for example, how excessive use of antibiotics impacts our mitochondrium. I mean, there are so many questions. So let's, people did get better with using, for example, ketogenic diet or low carbs diet for treatments of bipolar or schizophrenia. And I don't say one needs to use medication or diet, but what if we try both to start with and then see where the client is? Because one needs to be ready as well to experience with diets. It's not an easy journey.
True. Yeah.
But
so
again,
is there one magical diet?
I don't think so, but we probably need more therapeutic nutritionists to work with us.
I didn't. Is that actually a thing at the moment?
I don't know.
I've never. Yeah.
But something really to think about, how to adjust these things. Because look, if someone is permanently depressed, then one needs to ask themselves the question: do you want to be tired on ketogenic diet or tired and depressed?
Right.
Because not having enough carbohydrates make us a little bit more tired. Well, it's no brainer, right? One prefer. I mean, whoever went through a dark depression, they know that it's much easier to be just tired.
Right.
and then
Yeah.
we'll have the joy. We do need to take into consideration our biology. We cannot just work with the narrative in our
Yeah.
mind. It's look where we are. It's not mind. It's the whole body. We do, and when we are listening to our body, we can actually pick up the clues.
Oh, clues. Yeah.
Like, what is there? What's happening? Because sometimes there is a lot in our body that communicates. If there is an organ dysfunction, and then, this can cause depression. So we can pick up on that. It's really worth living in our body. I know that we very often dissociate from our body because it's the initial feel of coming back into our body. It's quite like, oh, it's better to distract ourselves. But when we make a habit of living in our body and experience the world through our body, we are in a much safer place because we are picking up the clues about the world, about how our body function. Maybe it's not an easier way of living because we have all those sensations to navigate. But once you have the map, you can feel the body easier. I promise, it's just getting easier and easier when one dissociates less and feels the body more. And long term, when we're going into aging, I would say it's a much better approach to live in our body because there are so many things that can go wrong.
Well, true. But dissociating I think it's a very common coping mechanism. Have I lost you? Oh, no, you're there. Sorry, the picture froze. It's a very common coping mechanism, but in the long term, it's really not very helpful, is it?
Not in a long term. It is for a reason.
Short term, it's great.
Yeah, exactly. If we go through trauma, there is a reason for that, and it makes us resilient. It helps us survive. Well, in this world, we are overstimulated with everything. So putting on Netflix and dissociating for a while from our body, or even if you have just a cold or COVID, sometimes it's okay, right? We don't have to criticize ourselves for not feeling ourselves. But then we just need to be conscious of that. I'm not feeling myself today, but I make sure that I'll just pick up the pace tomorrow when I feel more rested. And I'll come to my body. I just couldn't feel myself today because I was too tired and those sensations were too overwhelming or perhaps triggering. But I'll pick up the pace tomorrow. I will be less tired and then I'll check with me. And the practice of checking, every day in the morning, how am I really today? And then nurturing whatever comes. It's a very powerful practice. Without criticism, without any type of judgment. And you know what I found useful the longer I live? These practices are very useful, but then to have values in life somehow examined. So, because we are pulled in so many directions and we can be pulled by different affects in many different directions. Let's say I live in London. I practice in a very, so where I live, it's quite normal, but part of my practice is in quite a luxurious location. So, being in that narcissistic space, there is an affect of narcissism. Everyone wants to be the best or hiding behind a certain way of being when inadequacy or difficulties, one doesn't want to show that, or if they want to show it, it's shown in a way that doesn't look bad. So anyway, we live in a very narcissistic kind of, it's a kind of affect of narcissism about us in the clouds. What we see, how people talk to us. There is that feel of maybe perhaps it's part of capitalism that people want to sell things and make us feel inadequate, so then we can buy. But there is something else. It's we live in a culture that it's very individualized. So each of us wants to be individual, great, but there is a difference between self-realization and a narcissistic kind of feel that kind of blows up our ego. Self-realization is working with our body and being resilient and having the courage to go where our true self leads us. It might be in places when we don't earn money, when we don't live in the beautiful places. It might be somewhere where we serve other people. It might be when we are going against the current and speaking the truth, the way how our heart perceives it, our inner self. So that's self-realization, at least in my understanding. But narcissistic blow-up is like, oh, I'm still not in the place I wanted to be. That's kind
Okay.
of, I'm not individualized enough. And with these, because we will be always pulled with the narcissistic affect, because that's how it is in this world at the moment.
True, yeah.
So I always say, write down, well, we need to all write down our values and just keep to them. If in our life there is a value of service and living with joy and love, then let's reconnect with that affect every day in the morning. And let's discard other affects. We can nurture them and say, oh, I have got pulled into this direction, pulled into that direction, or someone really upset me. I can nurture these sensations in my body, but I still keep aligned with my values. And this my life is very, very, very simple. We are more resilient. If I have a value of living a simple life and I'm not going to overspend and buy million of things, and that's my value of sharing my resources, whatever it is, I'm just keeping to those values, and I don't. It's not about fighting someone, because then I'm bringing the affect of being angry that the world is not the way that I want it to be. It's slightly narcissistic. I want it's I want to be acceptance of that's the world as it is. I don't mean I accept certain values in the world, but I can live next to them because I know my smallness and I know that I'm not going to change them. But by living differently, my values, I I I just realize, I self-realize, I self-actualize. And I'm guessing you probably want to tell a little bit more about that because you chose,
No.
way of living that
Yeah.
you're living your heart, you're exploring, I'm guessing you're searching for the truth. You're minimalizing your life to the core of what's very important, and I'm guessing you're deciding what's the values that are important.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a huge advocate for getting clear on your values because, like you said, it makes life so much simpler. It's very clear. If you're being pulled in different directions, but you come back to, well, family's important to me, or whatever your value is, then it becomes clear. Well, I'm going to go in this direction.
Yes, and with each value, it will come love and suffering. It's normal. We need to,
Right.
but then we're undertaking that. We're not stepping away because this is my value, and then I'm examining how I'm going to approach that value. So if the value is service or living in love or living in that object, right? Or let's say when you said that breathing with the light blue that you discovered, or you live in that space all the time, wherever you're pulled when you're pulled in a different direction, you can always have a quiet moment and bring yourself to that space and to the value of freedom and self-compassion. And that is a value that you live your life from. And that value will be a part of your sun in your inner system, in the solar system. It's a part of who you. It feels like it's part of your true self.
Right. Yeah.
And even if you are noticing yourself that you have a bad day because of so many reasons, external, biological, it's normal. Then you are noticing that it's in your body, and then slowly reactivating the place in your body that you live from.
Oh.
And if that means that you need to hold these two at the same time, let it be. But
Right.
you're still investing into your brain, because there is a neuroplasticity in our brain, even when we are getting older, that we're creating the pathways in our brain, or allowing them to be created, where when the parasympathetic nervous system activates itself quicker. So we're just long-term well healthier.
Yeah. You really got to, it's a lot of self-awareness, or what was the term you were using? Self-realization. Is that what you were calling it?
Oh, I've been
Um,
practicing for a while. But
yeah.
because I never like to apply a strategy and then trusting, just, when you're applying something and then you think, but it's not working in the counseling room. And that's what always, really depends what sort of values we were brought up in.
Oh, yeah.
One needs to examine it. But I didn't know when I went into training in psychoanalysis that my values perhaps are not as compatible with that school, because that school keeps the client or patient slightly separate as an object of observation. When
Yeah.
my values are, I was raised in a value when, human being is God, right? It's a beauty in another human. You serve another human. You do everything possible in your power to and to make the life better. I mean, I was raised Christian, so it's not like not in a fundamentalist way. It's just in a kind of normal way that another human being is sacred.
Right. And I think, I'm not religious, but to me as an onlooker, like a core part of Christianity is love.
Yeah. And you're sacred. It doesn't mean that it's people very often mislead kindness with politeness.
Oh, yeah.
Or like if they think that someone is not kind because someone speaks the truth. I'm treating anyone who is in contact with me as I would like to be treated. No matter whether the person is in a better social standing than me or in a lower social standing, whether it has got different color of the skin or sexuality, for me that person is sacred. But that's a value that it's one needs to realize that it's a value. Otherwise, if people don't know that, then in many organizational structure, one get into trouble.
Right.
Because that might not be, it might not be, it's very important to understand values of organizations we work with, because even when especially the unconscious values of organization. So there might be a conscious value of organization we serve everyone.
Yeah.
But the unconscious value is, I'm treating you because you are a source of income. And if I can, and I don't say everyone needs to earn money, but if people overdiagnose you, or if an organization says that you need to have more treatment, whether it's operations, psychological treatment, whatever it is, because they see you as a long-term income,
Yeah.
that unconsciously the value is not human is sacred. The value is our profit is the most important value here. And
There's
in the
just
world
so
we
much to
live in,
unpack with values, aren't there?
yes, it is. And especially when we work for someone, being being aware of those values, or even we're trained in organizations. People say, "Oh, I'm training as a therapist in that modality. Why doesn't work for me?" People don't understand that even psychotherapeutic modalities, or any modalities in the world, any medical modality, anything, it's a business model. It's a business model that people need
Yeah.
to. Because if people give you a label that you are that, then it means you are the face of that business model. So when I'm saying about psychoanalytic or psychodynamic psychotherapy, of course I'm not carrying the label anymore, because I don't adhere to the business model. I don't work in that modality anymore. I'm saying, I am, although I use the whole training, I don't use the technique. So I can't say I work in that business model, because I do not share the value. My value is a human being is sacred, and I'll do absolutely everything for that human being to get better.
Yeah.
But
And
that's
just talking to
complexity
you,
of
I
our
can,
world, isn't it?
yeah. And just talking to you, I can feel it. I can see it, that you are, you're living in your values.
And the
It
world is
seems like,
this
anyway,
way.
right? Doing the best you can. Yeah. Like, and it's a journey, I think. And a lot of people, I think they'll be listening to this, and perhaps they're in a place where they're not sort of living or working in alignment with their values. So they're feeling this conflict. Would you have any advice to them?
Do not be afraid of the conflict,
Oh, yeah.
because it's a very, very important part of our life to choose our values, to slow down, to acknowledge that conflict, to nourish it, even with the techniques that we practiced. What the conflict is telling us, because when we choose certain values, there is always a gain and loss.
Right.
So even with that simple example, that if people work for a value, a human being is sacred, but not for gaining as much financial profit from it, that means you have a loss, right? You might struggle with a mortgage. You might there are losses.
Yeah.
At the same time, that feel might tell you in your body that you need to sell the skills that you have in a way that you feel like you are respect yourself. It's not only serving others, you are applying the same values to yourself. So it's that working with that conflict, sitting with it, and yes, there will be a tension, there will be a loss, there will be a gain. And there
Yeah.
might be a situation when you'll be living your life differently than someone else.
Yeah.
And that might be
It's
a
highly
tension
likely to
between
happen, isn't
friends
it?
or
Yeah.
family, right? Yes. And we need to also say that there are people in this world that they might have certain values, but they don't have the freedom to live their values.
Ooh,
And to be in that space as well, and to apply the compassion, because it's a privilege to live with our values in this world.
true. True.
It's a privilege to choose them.
Mm.
So if someone doesn't have that space to work in the body with that, the sensation of loss, that there is not enough space at this moment to choose the values that they wish to choose.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because I talk about values a lot on the podcast, and it's very easy to be very utopic about it. And, you pick your values and live in your values and da-da-da. It's all wonderful. But, what you've spoken to it's a reality for many people in the world right now.
For many women.
Oh, yeah, true that. Yeah, yeah.
For many people in minority.
Yes.
That they need to somehow adjust themselves to be safe.
Safe. Yes. Yeah.
So in therapy, we can't ignore the reality of the external. I would say that the external makes us more ill than the internal. So the social system we live in, the affect that is in the air makes us more unwell than what's in the body. Of course, when we're aging, it's a little bit different, but
Yeah.
but in reality, the social system we live in makes us very unwell.
And it's largely out of our control, isn't it?
Yes. That's
Yeah.
why applying nurturing and compassion towards what's happening in our body without the criticism and judgment is very important, because sometimes we can have a very false narrative about what's in our body. We can blame ourselves for something that is, the narrative is completely wrong.
Yeah.
For example, I'm guilty of this, instead of actually seeing the whole situation, the complexity of it, and that I did the best I could in that complex situation. So it's a very different narrative. It may feel the same in a sense, it might come as a guilt, but a skillful therapist will always, if someone says I feel guilt, I always dive into it, and I'll try to check whether the language really brings what's in the body. So, and I never say, let's call the emotions first. I would say, let's talk about the sensations in the body first. Because how do we know whether people have got a good enough emotional, it's here in primary school, we call it emotional literacy, which means that we can name the emotions correctly to how the
I think
body.
a lot of us are quite terrible at that, actually.
Yes, and it's, if we are very quick in naming, all of us, we can really misjudge that, and especially with sensations around shame, guilt, heaviness. These sensations really need to be looked into, because there might be something else. Or sometimes people feel guilt just because they feel. Like they were shamed by feeling emotions, or they just they have got a very small window of allowing emotions, what's allowed.
Right.
Let's imagine that there are a window and there are certain emotions are in the window, and what's outside of the window, it's not allowed. So there can be so many different affect, emotions, unknown, but it would come as guilt, because it's outside of the what's allowed to feel.
Yes.
So it's not always guilt is not always a guilt.
Right. Oh my gosh. This
Because
is a rabbit hole.
it might be terror, right? Or it might be just unknown or not being in control, and it comes guilt because it's outside of the window of tolerance. So it's really worth working with emotions and affect in therapy, and naming them and being very creative in how to approach them.
Yeah. Oh my
Even
goodness.
if they come as thoughts. If they
Right. Okay.
even they come as narrative. Because the narrative comes from somewhere.
Right. And would you say thoughts are good or bad?
Neither.
Yeah.
Neither. Because they just constantly there.
They're just there.
Aren't they?
Yeah.
They're just constantly there, just going on and on and on.
Yeah.
I just learn not to pay attention to them.
Yeah.
But
Because our
if
thoughts
I,
aren't always true, are they?
nah,
Mm.
I learn not to pay attention to them. And if I catch myself that I'm thinking about something, then I bring myself to my core affect, the one that I like to practice. And if I, you know, there are sometimes there is time when we are focused on a task and this is working very well, the brain. But if we don't have anything to do, then I like to think about an ocean or
Yeah, yeah.
or walking in the forest or doing something nice, because then it brings the affect of joy. And joy is, that's what I always aim in therapy. I don't aim for happiness because that's not possible, but the constant feel of joy, the awareness that we can be joyful, that life is joyful, that life is pulsating in everyone. It's enough to walk, to look at our
Mm.
dogs. I mean, God, they're such
Right.
joyful creatures. We
Yeah.
don't think about, it's just allowing the life that lives us, because we don't have control over it. It's
Oh,
the
true that. Yeah.
narcissistic struggle, right? That we feel that we're so omnipotent, that we have everything under control, when actually we are just dancing with whatever comes, and
Yeah.
we're responding to our values in that dance. And that
Cool.
dance, if we allow ourselves to be creative and playful, can be really, really joyful,
Yeah.
because we can
I
breathe.
love that analogy of dancing. Yeah.
Mm,
Uh,
and aim for that in life. If just to create a smooth dance with joy,
a
having the
smooth dance with
values,
joy.
guarding that, because there will be
Mm.
always other values trying to break it.
Oh, yeah. The values guarding your joy. Right. Now, I want to go back to something you said. You said that the aim of therapy, your goal is never for happiness. And then you mentioned joy. So I think many people use those words interchangeably. What is the difference between
They
happiness and
do,
joy?
don't they? And
Yeah.
people, probably all of us at some point in our life, to aim for some sort of happiness, and then whatever that image is, um,
Mm.
whatever people's emotional investment is in that image of happy image. Many people in our world is being constantly safe, having huge amount of savings, having a perfect relationship, having children that are never ill. that, that never happens.
Mm.
But if we find in our world the resilience to meet whatever comes with trust, that whatever those values are, if we in therapy, I always talk about the life that lives us. Trust that the life is benign, compassionate, gentle, creative, and that has got our goodness in its core. That it's enough to
Mm.
watch the pets. I love nature. Walking through the forest, that there is something beautiful about the planet that feeds us, that brings us oxygen, that
Mm.
there is a lot of care. And even though that the human destructiveness, it would be perfect. There is a lot of care. I know that there are, some mm, kind of climate uh, traumatic, even related to climate, and all of that. We can think why that is, but if we simplify our life and say to ourselves, there is a lot of care in our planet at the core of life itself, and we can learn to trust it and test it and observe it and see that there is a lot of love and compassion around us and nurturing. And it really, I like to imagine those affects that they are in us, but they also in others. And there is some sort of like energy in groups, or that people are coming together because of certain values or energy or affect. So if this is something that we shared, because we are not just living on our planet individually, so if there is something that is shared, we can really be looked after by it. So if you practice compassion in life or service, trust that this is bigger than you. Trust that this is going to move you in the right direction, because this is a value not just in your head, this is a value in your heart, and you're reconnecting with that value towards yourself and others every day. Then of course the affect grows and grows and brings more and more people around you.
Yes.
And it's in the planet as well, in spaces that you occupy. It's like an aquarium that in the aquarium, not the individual fish counts, but the water. It's the same with families. I like the aquarium kind of, because we don't look only about the individuals, we look after the atmosphere, the water in the aquarium or in the ocean. And the water
Yeah.
then moves us. So we are not alone. And we can have that trust formed. And this trust is formed by observation, how we lived our life through those values, how they carried us. So then when we test it over a few years, we see, yes, this is working. I lived those values for a couple of years and they are working for me. They don't save me from suffering in the world. This is not possible at all.
Right.
But they carry me through them. Or if I suffer, there is always someone or something that pulls me out. I still remember at some point when I was in the hospital, barely conscious, and there was a nurse coming. I was six hours in the hospital, just outside of neurology department, because no one wanted to admit me and I was very unwell. And there was a nurse coming and, what on earth is happening here? This girl needs to be seen immediately. And she arranged a transfer to another hospital for me and an ambulance. Here it is. I wish I wouldn't have been unwell, but that's not something that is visible in this world. But what is that I trust that there will be someone that can carry me for a while through their jobs or through whatever is happening. And if there is no affect that can carry me and there is a time that I need to pass when I'll be dying, I trust that those values will be carrying me as well. If that makes sense. That
It
they're so
does.
strong, the affect is so strong that by living in them, they will be carrying me anyway.
Yeah. I think what you're speaking to ties in really well with a question I ask every guest. So I want to know, Kasia, what does freedom mean to you? I feel like we've been touching on it throughout the whole episode, but let's break it down. What is freedom to you?
This is something that it's one of my core values.
Yeah.
And it's a gain and loss. Gain because I feel like freedom is the search for truth.
Yeah.
For living differently, being very independent. But I also feel that there is a loss in it because of searching for own paths and taking a risk. And I feel like, despite the fact that we live in society that loves freedom, I feel like many people actually give the freedom away very easily.
Yes. Yes.
And unconsciously, they don't even realize that. whether there are addictions or even just addiction from not suffering, not wanting to look things in into the eyes of truth, just
Right.
numbing ourselves with whatever comes. And if you really want to look into the eye of the beast, one needs to be able to feel those sensations in the body. That's why I feel like there is a bit of loss with it as well. That one needs to be prepared to undertake risk, to not align with values of places or organizations, and sometimes to be even kicked out of places because not resigning, because
Right.
it's not an, I don't think a true freedom it's an easy value to live with, because there is something about not, it's not about being anarchistic and rejecting everything, but it's about searching for the truth. And if something doesn't align with my values, like for example when I mentioned that a human being is sacred, then that limits my my opportunities.
Right. Yeah. There's always a price to pay, isn't there? There's the gain, as you mentioned, and the loss. And it's not always comfortable, is that the word, to embrace the value of freedom? Because freedom's very important to me as well. But in my opinion, my life's better for it.
You wouldn't choose any other way, and I wouldn't choose any other way. I just wouldn't be able to live without my freedom.
Yeah.
I remember that was probably like 30 years ago or even more. I was still a very young teenager, and I was praying for seeing the truth. I was praying for that I can see the truth. I still remember that. It's like,
Not many teenagers would be praying for that, let alone adults.
I want to see the truth how it is. Maybe because so until I was 9, there was a communistic regime in the country I grew up, and maybe that was something that it felt like, because like under many regimes, there is a narrative that people need to submit themselves to. But even if there is no regime, there is a narrative in the culture, and it's just being able to pass through the narrative. I was always very interested in that.
Kasia, this has been like amazing. Such a stimulating conversation. I've learnt a lot. And I think I'm going to have trouble finding a therapist I like now that you've set such a high standard. I'm like, okay, they exist. I need to find one now.
But please contact me. I know many. When you work in a certain way, people then, I hope that people connect. And they connect and carry themselves through difficulties. Because as you said, if we fight for certain values, we need alliance.
Very true. Yeah.
But it's amazing to meet you. I love your search for freedom.
Thank you.
And I love your podcast. I love the way you live. And it's an honor to be here.
Thank you. I feel the same. And to hear that freedom's one of your core values, I just went, no wonder I was drawn to you. No wonder. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. You've been so generous, and it's just been amazing. And I'm mindful that your child's really unwell right now. So it means a lot that you've put some time aside to kind of just pour your heart out, and so grateful.
Thank you.
All right, we'll talk soon.
We will be.
thank you so much for listening to the episode. Please go share it with someone you love. Leave me a rating and review if you haven't already. And please hit the follow button. Less than 10% of you are actually following the podcast. So just tap the follow button. It really helps push the podcast out to more people so we can have more impact, which at the end of the day is what I want to do. Also, you can check out the full archive of episodes, see the show notes and the full transcriptions at my Fancy Pants website, thepursuitoffreedom.com.au. And don't forget, you matter. You're worth it and you are so, so capable. I'll see you next week.